Why has Nintendo never made Super Mario Sunshine 2? Since the original Super Mario Sunshine was released, we have seen amazing fan remakes, followed by hoax after hoax, teasing we will see Super Mario Sunshine 2 on the Nintendo Switch, or even a Super Mario Sunshine remaster, which I would love to see happen, but it opens the door for a larger discussion on why Nintendo isn't acting on the fan outcry for this specific Mario game franchise to continue. Now, the reason why Nintendo never moved forward is a tough question to answer. Nintendo is a relatively secret company that does its best to not announce games until it's absolutely necessary, and also really never feel pressured to make a sequel, and instead have chosen time and time again to push their biggest franchises into completely new directions instead of dwelling on the past. Which is great for keeping franchises from going stale, but it hurts when fans gravitate towards certain games over the years and want to see them return in some form or another. And it seems Super Mario Sunshine is just another Mario entry that will most likely never have a sequel. So let's dive into where is Super Mario Sunshine 2? Let's go! To get the full picture and finally understand why Nintendo won't make a sequel to this fan favorite title, we have to go back to the beginning. In 2001, which was the year Final Fantasy X, Grand Theft Auto 3, and Super Smash Bros. Melee were released. 5 years prior to this, Nintendo had released the highly successful Super Mario 64, which to date has sold almost 12 million copies. Remember that number because it will be important later. And it was clear that Nintendo was working on a follow-up to a main series Mario game to help push their next generation of consoles, which was the GameCube. And it was in August at the Space World 2001 event in Tokyo, Japan that Miyamoto showed off the first footage of the next Mario game, Super Mario Sunshine. At the time, not much was known about the next blockbuster title from Nintendo, except the game looked like it takes place in a cityscape, which is vastly different from Super Mario 64. And there will be a new jetpack-like mechanic Nintendo wasn't ready to reveal details about yet. And the game was scheduled to be released in Japan in summer of 2002, and was released in August inside the United States. And when the game was finally released in August, the development team behind the game gave a few interviews which provided some more context around the main problem with the game. In an interview with Insider, they asked Tezuka and Koizumi and Kenta about the flood system, which the entire game was based upon. The flood is what makes this game stand apart from past Mario games. There's also the location and things like that, but this was the biggest mechanic they've added to a Mario game in a very long time. But that doesn't come without the criticism that the game had become too gimmicky and takes the challenge away from platforming when you have this flood system to navigate, and so much of the battling and moving around the world was based on that. And the developers knew this before the game was even released. And the water pump idea did not start out as a Mario mechanic. It actually started out as a side project for Nintendo. The question asked to the producer was, quote, "When did the development of Super Mario Sunshine commence?" Tezuka said, quote, "We were working on a concept of gameplay using the water pump, and after some trial and error, we decided to apply it to the Mario franchise." And the follow-up question was, quote, "If it is trial and error," Koizumi said, "It was thought that the world was daringly out of character with Mario. Therefore, I thought that a man-type character would be used at first. But if there was a man next to Mario, there's a sense of incongruity. Then we sort of unified the character we thought finally suited the view of the world. However, regarding the man-type character we partly made, since the island's Monty Fellows and Mayor Fellows were wacky, cartoony characters, they did not have the sense of incongruity. Also, the scriptwriter of Animal Crossings helped sequence the residents' words." Now, it makes sense that this function might not have been their first idea to take the direction of this new Mario game into. Years after Super Mario Sunshine was released, Miyamoto did an interview with Japan's Nintendo Dream magazine, and he was asked about Nintendo titles that never saw the light of day. He responded and talked about Mario 64 too. He said that pieces of Mario 64 that were created turned into other games, and that they were planning on including Luigi in the original sequel to 64 2, but could never get the mechanics to work. And he followed this up by talking about Mario 128 as well, which was shown as a GameCube video demo, which was the main inspiration behind Super Mario Galaxy years later. But at the time, it was another idea placed on the back burner and shelved for Nintendo. which is where the nozzle comes in. It sounds like it was never a big favorite among insiders and workers at Nintendo using the flood system, but it was used regardless, and the producers definitely reflect on this. It wasn't their favorite, and they didn't know if the community would like this idea. Continuing on in the interview, they were asked, the fact that you can temporarily fly in the sky with the nozzle radically opens up a lot of new gameplay mechanics. Azui responded, there were about 10 candidates for the type of nozzle which we should use. The flood was actually not one of the favorites, but it seemed to work the best in the gameplay setting. Tezuka said the direction of the game would have been too complicated and risky with some of the nozzles we were contemplating, and Azui closed saying there were plenty of shortcuts that can be accessed with the flood system back to the nozzle point. If this game was not 90% dedicated to the nozzle peripheral, then some of the more complicated nozzles would have been used. So this was a hit or miss feature with fans and a hit or miss feature even among the development team, and sounded like the least worst option to them when they were developing and what would actually be practical for the game they've already made. And that's not the only problem the game had. Looking at the sales of the main entry Mario games as well show that this was not necessarily a success Nintendo was looking for. I do think it's worth mentioning that for each new console launch, usually Nintendo will push out a new Mario entry, and then sales of the games are based on the console themselves. So this is all very rough estimates and it all varies, but if we look at the N64 itself sold around 33 million console units within its lifetime, and the main entry Super Mario title, Super Mario 64, sold around 12 million copies, which puts the ownership of the game right at 36% of the people who owned a 64 owned Super Mario 64, just a rough estimate. Moving on to the GameCube, the console itself saw a pretty big dip in sales and only sold 22 million copies, and the mainline titles suffered from this as well and only sold 6.28 million copies estimated worldwide, which puts the ownership of the game at 28.5%. Of GameCube owners also own Super Mario Sunshine, which is a large dip from the last installment. That's a little under 10%, and we can also look at the Wii as well for fun. But this console was a big outlier because it just became such a big international hit, so the numbers are a bit skewed. The console itself sold 101.63 million units, while Super Mario Galaxy, the real mainline title, sold 13 million copies, which puts ownership right under 13%, which is way lower compared to the past consoles, until we see that they also released another new Mario game just 3 years later after the Wii was released, which is New Super Mario Bros., which definitely impacted sales, and that game sold 30.8 million copies, which would have put ownership of that game at 30% of all Wii owners, which is still higher than Super Mario Sunshine. Yes, there were bundles and other factors, but you can see that Super Mario Sunshine was definitely not a big hit that Nintendo needed. A lot of GameCube owners, the vast majority, did not own it, 75%. And based on the flood system, all of that all led to some problems. Now, this is all to show, depending on what numbers you look at, the game itself sold half of what a normal Super Mario title sells, and Nintendo knows this. 1 year after Super Mario Sunshine was released at a pre-E3 press conference, the CEO of Nintendo, Iwata, said the game sales did not live up to expectations, and he speculated that the average player found the game's complexity off-putting, and went on further to say the game should have been designed differently, but they just couldn't. So where does that leave us now? Miyamoto let Kazumi, the designer behind Super Mario Sunshine, to continue to work on big projects for them, like Donkey Kong Jungle Beat, and eventually they did return to the Mario 128 prototype and design Super Mario Galaxy. And the references have been made throughout other Nintendo games referencing Sunshine. There's Starshine Beach Galaxy in Super Mario Galaxy 2, which used some very similar ideas that were created in Super Mario Sunshine, and even features Bowser Jr. There have been tracks referencing the game in Mario Kart and Super Smash Bros. And more recently, fans have started to speculate that Nintendo might have started teasing the return of Super Mario Sunshine with a beach-themed Mario. So only time will tell if Nintendo is willing to bring back this series in spite of low sales and gimmicky mechanics. It seems like instead Nintendo just moved forward with Super Mario Galaxy, which the first one did very well for Nintendo, enough to get a sequel, and I think it pulled together a lot of ideas that Nintendo had had been working on in the past without feeling too gimmicky and relying on a system like FLUDD in Super Mario Sunshine. Now, let's just say Nintendo is working on another Super Mario Sunshine game or sequel or whatever they want to call it. What could we see in this game? Well, at the end of Super Mario Sunshine, the original, we see Paintissimo, one of the characters who was in the Isle Delfino. We see him walk up on this beach to Bowser Jr.'s paintbrush that's left in the sand. So some people have speculated that if we do see a sequel, maybe he takes up the paintbrush and he could be a villain or leads to bigger problems with having this still out in the world. Also, in the very beginning of the game, when we are first flying to Isle Delfino, we see a bunch of different islands as well, all shaped, and we see a turtle and some other different animals and just items. So people have speculated maybe we could go to a different island and we could have some adventures there similar to the first game, but also still with this island, very bright, very vibrant setting, which could be cool. But other than that, there's not too much else we know or can speculate about what the game would actually be about. That's where I'm going to end this video, and that explains where is Super Mario Sunshine 2. Low sales, gimmicks that fans and the developers themselves didn't like all contribute to why we never got a sequel to this game and why it's been on hiatus for so long. This game has a very special place for me. I played it growing up. I'm excited if they ever do want to bring it back and what some of these teases mean, and I'd be very down to buy whatever they end up wanting to release for this. That's where I'm going to end this video though. Make sure to like and share, subscribe for weekly gaming news, and I will see you guys in the next one.
Let's go!